Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Alex Moreno. I'm 32 years old, born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I worked as an emergency dispatcher at Allegheny County 911. For 7 years, I fielded panicked calls from people in life-or-death situations, and I thought I'd heard everything. Home invasions, structure fires, overdoses, shootings. But nothing prepared me for the night we lost all signal. It started like any other early autumn morning shift, 6 a.m. sharp. I clocked in at the Emergency Operations Center on the north side, an old, reinforced concrete building tucked between East Ohio Street and the old Heinz plant. We were already running skeleton crews because of staff shortages, and my team was down 2 more dispatchers thanks to flu season. We were holding it together, barely. The first weird call came in at 6:17. It was from a nurse at UPMC Mercy. Her voice was tight with fear. "We've got multiple code whites. They're biting people. The patients are biting the staff. One of them tore out a security guard's throat. We've locked down the ER, but they're getting through." The line cut out with a loud crash and screaming. I traced the call, confirmed it was a real number from inside the hospital. I flagged it as a high-priority incident and radioed Pittsburgh PD dispatch. Then I logged it. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last coherent call we'd get all day. Within the hour, calls started flooding in from the Hill District, Uptown, and South Side. People screaming about sickos, crazies, and blood. An ambulance crashed on Liberty Avenue near the Greyhound station. The EMS crew didn't answer any hails after that. One caller from Duquesne University reported a man tearing through the glass doors of the student union, naked, covered in blood, growling. At 7:03, cell signals became spotty. Verizon, Atent, T-Mobile, all of them. We chalked it up to tower congestion or a software glitch. No one considered that the networks might be failing. By 7:12, we had unconfirmed reports of first responders being attacked. A state trooper outside of Wilkinsburg had called in at 10:13 before his radio went dead. That's when we realized this wasn't an isolated incident. This was something else. Something coordinated? No, that didn't make sense. The behavior was too erratic, but it was spreading fast. Our center had a bank of 12 dispatch workstations, all equipped with hardened Dell Optiplex systems running CAD, computer-aided dispatch software. Mine began freezing around 7:30. The mapping interface stuttered. The phone lines flickered in and out. By 8 o'clock, half the stations were offline. Power didn't go out, the power stayed on, but the data systems, they just died. Emergency management officials arrived by 8:20 with a police liaison in tow. Captain Marcus Ellis, a veteran of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police. He looked pale, sweating through his uniform. He told us, bluntly, that entire sectors of the city were in chaos. They were pulling units back towards downtown, consolidating. It's not safe to patrol in 1s or 2s. They're turning on us. Whatever this is, it spreads through bites or blood. We don't know. But they're not just violent, they're fast, too fast. He emphasized that. Too fast. His words didn't make sense until I saw it for myself. The EOC, like most secure buildings, had a hardened basement. Around 9:15, when a call came in from the station's own front desk, unusual since internal calls didn't route through the dispatch system, I picked up. It was Officer Lasky. He was whispering. 2 men. Just walked through the glass, didn't even flinch. Smashed the doors like paper. They're coming down the hall now. I locked the armory, but gunshots. Muffled, then clearer, then screams. We initiated the lockdown. Security shutters came down with a bang, cutting off the main entrance and sealing the dispatch floor behind motorized blast doors. We were sealed in. Me, 3 other dispatchers, 2 tech support guys, Captain Ellis, and Diane, our supervisor. We waited. We listened. For an hour, there was silence except for the whir of air filtration and the soft buzz of fluorescent lights. And then the fire suppression system kicked in automatically. That's when we knew something worse had happened. Smoke began to filter through the floor vents. One of the techs, Connor, bypassed the fire alarms with a tablet and security fob. The security cameras were still live, somehow. He tapped into the west hallway feed. What we saw made my stomach drop. 6 bodies, all law enforcement, lying in a smear of blood outside the armory. One of them, Lasky, was twitching. Standing over him was a man in scrubs, half his face missing. He wasn't walking. He was sprinting in circles, erratic, jerking violently as if driven by something unnatural. The others, those who had been dead, rose behind him, disjointed like broken puppets. Their movements weren't human anymore. I looked to Captain Ellis. He was dead quiet, mouth tight. "They don't stop," he finally said. "We shot one 5 times in the chest. Didn't even slow it down." We made a plan. Ellis had a keycard to the lower tunnel access, an old service corridor that ran under the EOC and connected to a nearby parking structure on Madison Avenue. If we could make it through, maybe we could reach a cruiser or a secure vehicle, then regroup at the city-county building. The building's emergency lighting cut out at 10:42. Connor rigged 2 LED work lights from the server maintenance kit and handed out emergency radios from the equipment drawer. We kept our gear basic. Ellis took a standard-issue Glock 17 with 3 mags, and Diane grabbed a fire axe from the safety wall. I took a steel pry bar, not ideal, but solid. We cracked open the emergency hatch leading to the tunnel corridor. The passage was only about 6 feet high, lined with damp concrete and old wiring. I led, followed by Diane, Ellis, and the 2 techs. The air smelled stale, like mold and iron. Our footsteps echoed. It felt like we were being watched. Halfway down, the tunnel split. Left led toward the parking garage. Right toward the boiler access. We moved left. That's when we heard the dragging. Ellis raised his pistol. Diane backed up, white-knuckling the axe. A shadow flickered at the end of the hall. Then something sprinted out of the darkness. Barefoot, blood-soaked, arms flailing, jaw wide open. No sounds, just full-speed movement. Ellis fired. 2 shots center mass. It kept coming. He shot again, headshot. The thing dropped like a puppet cut from strings. We didn't wait. We ran. The garage was dim, illuminated only by dusty light shafts breaking through ventilation grates. Abandoned cars sat in every direction, some with doors hanging open, some with blood streaked across the windshields. Ellis found his cruiser, an unmarked Ford Interceptor utility near the exit ramp. The back window was shattered, but the ignition worked. We piled in. As we pulled up the ramp, the exit gate was already raised. Outside, the city had transformed. Smoke rose from the Strip District. I could see the spire of the Cathedral of Learning in the distance, partially shrouded in haze. Sirens echoed faintly. Gunshots, too. But no people, no traffic, just abandoned intersections and empty streets. We stopped at an intersection on Liberty Avenue. That's when we saw them. Dozens of them, staggering in loose packs, covered in blood, limbs twitching, jaws gnashing at nothing. They looked like people who had once been residents, workers, students, but now they were something else. They moved wrong. faster when they sensed us, like a swarm reacting to prey. They saw us. Ellis floored it. They ran. I remember the shock, the sheer speed. 2 of them kept pace with the car. One actually grabbed the mirror, clinging with broken fingers, howling. Diane smashed its face with the axe until it fell off. The body rolled across the pavement like a broken mannequin, limbs twitching and folding at impossible angles. We didn't have time to process it. Ellis kept his foot on the gas until we were several blocks clear of the swarm. The streets were still mostly empty, save for scattered debris, dead intersections, and the occasional burning vehicle. We didn't speak for a full 2 minutes. It was like no one wanted to be the first to say what we were all thinking. They weren't just infected. They weren't just fast. They didn't feel pain. And unless you destroyed the brain, nothing stopped them. The Ford Interceptor made it into Oakland by sheer luck. The turnpike entrances were gridlocked with abandoned vehicles, and we avoided them entirely by weaving down back roads and cutting across Fifth Avenue. The city looked surreal in the morning light. Pittsburgh without its people felt like a haunted museum exhibit. Traffic lights still cycled. Newsstands still held unread papers. Coffee shops still had warm pastries rotting behind the glass, but not a single pedestrian could be seen. Not a scream, not a siren, only the wind. The Carnegie Library stood like a gray fortress beneath the trees, its Romanesque architecture suddenly looking more like a castle than a place for story hour. Stone arches, thick double doors, and narrow windows. As we pulled into the lot near Shenley Plaza, we noticed the signs of recent resistance. Shattered glass near the entrance steps, scorched marks on the pavement, and what looked like an old trail of dried blood leading toward the eastern wing. The front entrance had been barricaded from the inside. Wood, furniture, metal racks. It had all been stacked and braced to form a crude blockade. No lights were visible inside, but it didn't feel abandoned. We circled the building once on foot, cautiously, weapons ready. That's when we spotted a side service door, slightly ajar. Ellis led the way in. The interior was silent, but the air smelled lived in. Old sweat, gun oil, dried food. A barricade of desks and chairs had been erected inside the lobby, with rope tied across a set of doors leading deeper into the building. Someone had been here, and not too long ago. As we moved inside, a figure emerged from behind the main reading desk. A tall man in his mid-40s, unshaven, wearing a worn gray hoodie and tactical cargo pants. He didn't raise a weapon but kept his hand near a holstered sidearm. His voice was calm but alert. "Identify yourselves," he said. Ellis raised his hand slowly. "Captain Marcus Ellis, Pittsburgh PD. We're not infected. We just escaped the North Side EOC." The man studied us for a moment, then nodded slightly. "You brought others?" 3 civilians. 2 techs, 1 dispatcher, all clean." That was enough. He gestured for us to follow him and led us through a narrow corridor lined with bookshelves to a back staff area. There, in a secured reading room that had been converted into a makeshift shelter, we met the rest of the group. There were 5 of them. The man we'd spoken to introduced himself as Daniel Roth, a former Army combat medic and now a security consultant. The others were Lauren Chu, a graduate student in library sciences who had been working late when the outbreak began. Hassan Tariq, a software engineer who lived 2 blocks away and had rushed in with a first aid kit and a radio. And sisters Hannah and Mel Carter, high school students from Shadyside who had been at a robotics workshop in the conference room upstairs. Their teacher hadn't made it. They'd been here for nearly 36 hours, holding out since the first wave hit. Daniel had barricaded the entrances and rigged backup power using a pair of deep cycle marine batteries and an inverter pulled from an old UPS unit in the server room. The building's old generator had failed within the first few hours, overloaded or out of fuel. They had food from the vending machines and a stash of emergency supplies Lauren had hoarded for a disaster prep elective she taught last semester. "We were waiting for help," Daniel said. "We kept the radios on, tried to make contact with City Command. Nothing. Then the towers went dead. Now we're just trying to survive." We brought in our remaining gear and sealed the side entrance again. Once inside, we finally allowed ourselves to slow down. The adrenaline dump hit hard. Diane slumped against a metal file cabinet, hands still wrapped tight around the axe. The techs, Connor and Miguel, sat on the floor, backs against the wall, trying to reboot one of the laptops they'd carried in a Faraday-bagged Pelican case. It was mid-afternoon by the time we ate. MREs and trail mix passed around in silence. The library outside the shelter area was still and dark. No movement. Daniel explained how they'd layered furniture along the ground floor staircases and locked the fire doors. Only the skylights and the upper floor windows remained exposed, and even those were blocked by high shelves and blackout tarps. "We've had movement outside," he said, "mostly after sunset. Packs of them. They sniff the perimeter. They can't see through the stone, but they can hear. When someone talks too loud, or if the generator hiccups, they swarm." We didn't sleep that night. None of us could. We took turns on watch, listening through a battery-powered baby monitor Daniel had set up as a makeshift motion detector near the west stairwell. Around 3 a.m., we heard them, scraping at the walls, fingers dragging against the doors, low, guttural breathing that didn't sound human anymore, like animals trying to remember how to speak. At sunrise, they were gone. Ellis proposed a plan. We couldn't stay in the library forever. Supplies would eventually run out, and even though the stone walls protected us, they also trapped us. If something happened, if fire broke out or an infected made it inside, we'd have nowhere to run. He wanted to reach the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center's biomedical science tower across the street. The BST housed labs, a backup generator, and possibly medical supplies. More importantly, it had a rooftop with line of sight to the Cathedral of Learning and beyond. If any place still had power, that tower could reach it with a directional antenna. Connor and Hassan worked overnight to assemble a communications uplink using a ham radio kit, an old Cisco signal booster, and scavenged copper wire. It wasn't perfect, but it could push UHF bursts to several kilometers if line of sight was clear. We just needed height, and power, and time. We moved at dawn. The crossing from the library to the BST was only 300 feet, normally a brisk walk across Shenley Plaza, but we had to assume there were infected nearby, hiding in buildings, behind hedges, or in parked vehicles. We went in 2 teams. Ellis, Daniel, and I formed the first team. Diane, Hassan, and Lauren followed 30 seconds behind, covering the rear. We ran hard and low, zigzagging through the plaza. I remember the leaves crunching under my boots, the sun rising behind the cathedral, and the feeling of every window being a threat. We reached the BST's rear entrance. Daniel had tools to force the lock. Took under a minute. We entered, sealed the door, and began sweeping the halls. The building was cold. Emergency lights still flickered in the lower levels. No sign of infected, yet. We made our way towards the stairwell, climbing slowly toward the 10th floor lab. Our goal was the 11th, administrative offices and roof access. That's when we heard the first sound of movement. A door creaked somewhere above, then a low moan, then another. We froze. Then we heard it. Feet. Fast feet, not walking, running. Daniel turned just in time to raise his baton as a figure in a lab coat barreled out of the corridor, mouth open, face covered in black blood. Ellis shot once, missed, Daniel struck hard, the sound echoing through the stairwell like a thunderclap. The figure crumpled but didn't stop moving. I lunged forward and brought the pry bar down on its head, once, twice. The second hit crushed the skull with a sickening crack, and the thing finally stopped jerking. Blood spread in a slow pool across the concrete. We all stood frozen, breath heaving, the stairwell reeking of rot and copper. The noise from the struggle lingered like gunpowder in the air. But worse than the smell, worse than the sound, was the growing realization that it wasn't alone. The silence afterward was too deep, too unnatural, as if the building itself was holding its breath. We didn't wait to find out. Daniel recovered first, gesturing for us to move. We climbed the remaining stairs at a near sprint. The stairwell creaked with every step, echoing into the depths below. Floor 10, then 11. The hallway at the top was empty, scattered with the overturned trash bins and papers fluttering in the stagnant air. We forced the door open into the administrative level and hurried toward the rooftop access panel. Ellis smashed the emergency glass on the override, yanked the manual release lever, and pushed the heavy steel hatch open. The scent of the open air hit us like a wave. Chill October wind, distant smoke, and the fading scent of blood. The sky overhead was steel gray, thick with haze drifting in from the south. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a fire burned large enough to turn the sky amber. We emerged onto the roof one at a time. It was flat, rimmed with rusting HVAC units, old satellite dishes, and a weather station. From this height, we could see everything. The Cathedral of Learning rising to the east like a sentinel, Shenley Park to the south curling along the Monongahela River, and further out, the blackened outlines of burning suburbs. The city had collapsed, not gradually, but all at once. Civilization had been unplugged overnight. Hassan and Connor joined us minutes later, lugging the ham radio kit and the makeshift antenna system. They'd wrapped copper wiring around an old aluminum ladder to boost the range, clamped it to a vent pipe, and linked it to a signal booster running off 2 lithium power bricks and a rewired car battery. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. They aligned the ladder toward the southeast, toward Harrisburg, where the FEMA transmission had originated. Hassan keyed the mic and sent out the first burst, a repeating signal tone followed by a pre-recorded voice loop. Emergency beacon. Carnegie Library group alive. 7 survivors. No infections. Coordinates inbound. Requesting evac or relay. Repeat. We stood there in silence, listening to the buzz and pop of the static-filled channel. There was no immediate reply, just faint interference and the occasional fragment of a distant broadcast. But then, just after the third loop, something punched through. A voice. Weak, clipped, but clear enough to parse. Received partial. Advise, remain stationary. Extraction grid being re-established. Do not approach major hospitals. Confirm survivor count. It wasn't much, but it meant one thing. Someone out there was still listening. The moment grounded us. For the first time in days, we felt anchored. There was a line connecting us to the outside world, no matter how faint or frayed. We stayed on the roof another hour, rotating the antenna, logging timestamps and signal strength, trying to pin down the FEMA group's position. Most of it was guesswork, and the weather didn't help. Interference grew as storm clouds rolled in from the west. By early afternoon, the wind picked up. The sky turned a dull green-gray, the kind of sky that signaled a pressure drop, the kind that usually comes before a squall. We packed the gear, double-sealed the battery case, and secured the rooftop hatch. Back inside, we split up to check the building for supplies. Daniel took Lauren and the Carter sisters to sweep the upper labs. I stayed with Ellis and Diane to examine the lower floors for equipment and anything we could use as fuel or food. The halls were quiet again. The lab equipment sat unused, some covered in tarps, others blinking with long-dead LEDs. The silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was loaded, like standing in the eye of a storm. We came across a secured lab on the 9th floor, labeled Department of Pathobiology, Level 2 Access Only. The lock was digital, but Miguel had joined us by then and managed to override it using a borrowed laptop and a bypass plug from the facility's tech cart. Inside, the room was cold, still powered by its own backup source. There were rows of glass containment cabinets, freezers, and sealed coolers labeled in biohazard red. What we found inside changed everything. There were test samples, lab notes, and a chalkboard filled with frantic handwriting, diagrams of a virus. Not just any virus. A recombinant pathogen marked with the designation RV23 with gene splicing notes referencing prion resistance and neurostimulant triggers. Diane read aloud, slowly, horrified. This wasn't spontaneous. This was experimental. Someone was engineering something here, something that bypassed standard immune responses. Ellis stared at the board, jaw clenched. The date on the last entry was 3 days before the first outbreak report. Daniel called us via radio a moment later. They'd found bodies, 3 of them, upstairs in one of the chemistry labs. 2 researchers and a janitor, all dead. No bites, no wounds. They'd sealed the doors and poisoned themselves with lab reagents. We regrouped at the reading room by nightfall. The mood had shifted. Knowing that the outbreak hadn't just been an accident, but possibly the result of deliberate experimentation, shattered the illusion that we were caught in a natural disaster. This was a chain reaction that someone started. As the storm moved in, thunder rolled across the skyline. Rain followed in sheets, drenching the streets, hammering the windows. Lightning flared over the river, illuminating the shadows between buildings. That's when we saw them again. Through the narrow slit of window between the tarps, movement. Dozens, maybe more. They weren't reacting to the rain. They just stood in the storm, heads twitching, sniffing the air like they were searching. One of them, a tall man in a hospital gown, eyes milky, flesh bloated, looked directly at the building. Not toward a window, at the wall. It made no sense, but we all saw it. They know we're here, Daniel said quietly. They don't need to see us. They smell us, hear us. And then, suddenly, like a switch had been flipped, they moved. The entire group surged toward the entrance of the library in a dead sprint. The barricade shuddered with the first impacts. Wood cracked, metal groaned. We scrambled to reinforce it. Desks, filing cabinets, anything we could wedge into the hallway. The infected slammed themselves into the door with animal force. It was like holding back a flood with plywood. Miguel ran to activate the suppressor. The homemade sound scrambler hooked to an outdoor speaker, rigged to draw the infected away. He flipped the switch. A sharp, oscillating burst of white noise roared from the mounted speakers outside the library. It was loud, grating, almost painful. But that was the point. Low-frequency pulses mixed with warbled tones mimicked the sonic signature of human voices at a distance, something Hassan had read about in military field manuals. It wasn't just about being loud, it was about being interesting to a damaged brain. The effect was immediate. Several of the infected peeled away from the entry door, stumbling off into the storm-soaked courtyard like rats chasing phantom sound. The pressure against the barricade lessened, and for a few seconds we dared to hope that it had worked. But not all of them left. A few stayed, those that didn't react to the noise. One in particular pressed its face to the doorframe, sniffing. The skin around its eyes was raw, the pupils blown wide. It looked focused, too aware. It stepped back, then charged again. The second impact cracked one of the main door's hinges. A metal screech echoed down the corridor. We didn't have much time. Ellis and Daniel grabbed steel table legs and jammed them into the floor as braces. Diane ran for the emergency ladder leading to the mezzanine, pulling Hannah and Mel with her. Connor and Hassan were still on the roof, unaware that the suppressor had only worked partially. I shouted up the stairwell for them to get down fast. They returned within minutes, lugging the last of the radio gear, and slammed the rooftop hatch shut behind them. Connor had caught sight of something as he descended. Another cluster moving in from the west, maybe 30 strong. No time to regroup, no time to fight. We had to leave. Daniel pointed to the archives access hallway on the sub-basement level. It had a service tunnel, an old utility shaft built back when the library had been part of a municipal record system. Most didn't even know it existed. It hadn't been used in years, but if it was still intact, it would lead us toward Belfield Avenue, away from the horde clustering around the front. The trick was getting down there alive. We used a basic lure. Hassan, calm under pressure as ever, rigged a motion sensor from a smoke detector, connected it to a phone speaker, and tossed it out the rear emergency exit after forcing the lock open. As soon as it landed in the alley, it chirped, once, twice, and then played a looping audio file of overlapping voices and footsteps. The infected responded. All at once, they turned, leaving the door and chasing the sound into the alley like insects to a lamp. We didn't wait to celebrate. We moved, quiet and fast, down the back stairs, through the archival room, and into the basement corridor beyond. The sub-basement was a claustrophobic maze of damp stone, sealed doors, and rusting pipes. Flashlights bobbed in the dark as we navigated the narrow tunnel. At one point, we had to duck under a collapsed ventilation duct. Another section had standing water, 2 inches deep and freezing cold, but we didn't stop. No one complained. Everyone knew what was behind us. Finally, we found the tunnel hatch, a steel door, half-welded shut, but with enough give for Miguel to wedge a crowbar in and torque it open. The space beyond was pitch black, but the air smelled dry. It hadn't flooded. That was good enough. We pushed forward for nearly 20 minutes, following the tunnel as it curved and sloped downward. Eventually, it leveled out and ended at a heavy utility grate. Daniel and I lifted it together. Beyond was the service corridor under Belfield Avenue, and just beyond that, the street itself. We emerged behind the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, drenched, bruised, but still alive. The streets were mostly empty. The storm had driven the infected indoors or into deeper cover for now. From there, we made our way east, cutting through alleyways and across overgrown lots, staying low and avoiding any exposed roads. Our goal was RIDC Park, more specifically the cluster of low-rise biotech offices buried just outside the old research compound. By the time we reached the city edge, it was dusk again. We spent the night in an abandoned water treatment station just outside Sharpsburg. There, we took stock of what remained: 2 sidearms, 3 melee tools, the radio kit, and 1 final map. A marked blueprint of Silo 6, the place the lab notes had pointed to. According to the map, the entrance was beneath a disused logistics office along Gamma Drive, inside what used to be a Cold War-era civil defense facility repurposed for biocontainment in the early 2000s. That kind of thing had been done all over the country. Old bunkers converted into quiet corners of science, tucked away from oversight. We reached RIDC Park just after noon the next day. The outer perimeter was rusted chain link, already torn open in places. No guards, no patrols, just decay. The office itself was half collapsed from neglect, but the underground access was intact. A reinforced elevator shaft with a crank system had been sealed behind a security door. Miguel bypassed the lock using a portable 12V battery and a bypass switch he'd salvaged from a car alarm. It took 15 minutes. Every second felt like a lifetime. When the door finally opened, the air that escaped was dry, stale, and cold. The shaft descended into darkness. We climbed. The ladder down was over 40 feet, ending in a pressure-sealed corridor labeled with old FEMA tags and barcodes. Beyond, a steel chamber opened into a concrete vault lined with glass walls and labeled storage lockers. The facility hadn't been breached. Dust still hung undisturbed on the corners of the floor. There was no blood, no bodies. It was untouched. Inside the farthest locker was a secure case labeled RV-23 Genotype Control Batch 1A. Beneath it, a handwritten note. Administer only with active cortical suppression. Risk of hyperstimulation. Subject viability unstable beyond 14 hours. Use only on verified unexposed tissue samples. There were vials, maybe 10 of them, and beneath those, sealed files with timestamps, pathogen logs, and development history. It confirmed what we feared. RV-23 had been a neuroregenerative agent, originally developed for military trauma recovery. It wasn't a virus in the traditional sense. It was a gene vector combined with a prion-resistant delivery system designed to wake up dead tissue and force neural reactivation. The problem was, it didn't stop. It didn't restore life. It just rebooted movement, sensory input, aggression. What it brought back wasn't the person. It was the body running on basic drives. Hunger, motion, reaction to sound. The higher brain was gone. The infected weren't sick. They weren't dead either. They were locked in with one broken circuit still sparking. Hunt, feed, repeat. We took the case. We took the files. We copied the logs to Hassan's laptop and burned redundancies onto a thumb drive. There was no cure in that room, but there was understanding, and maybe, somewhere down the line, a way to stop it. We camped in Silo 6 that night, taking turns on watch as always. The next morning, we transmitted the full data package via high-band VHF from the portable antenna, pinging every known FEMA, DoD, and CDC frequency. The uplink wasn't fast, but it was stable. We included our coordinates. We included everything we'd found. Then we waited. At 17:43, a response came, not automated, not pre-recorded, a real voice. Clear, direct. To all survivors at RIDC Park. Message received. You are not alone. Airborne asset inbound. Mark rooftop with eye contrast signal. Secure the perimeter. Hold position. Help is coming. I still remember the sound of those words. Every syllable like a weight lifted off my chest. We made it back to the surface before midnight. The rain had stopped. The air was cold and dry. Ellis and I climbed to the top of the research center's garage structure and used road flares and reflective vests to build a makeshift landing marker. The others waited inside, staring at the sky. At exactly 4:31, we heard it. The deep thrum of rotors cutting through the early dawn silence. A Blackhawk, military registry, low light beacons sweeping the treetops, approached from the east. It hovered, then descended. Two figures stepped out. Full hazmat suits, armed but calm. They took our names, scanned for contamination, loaded us into the hold. As the aircraft rose above Pittsburgh, I looked out through the side door. The city below us burned slowly, silently, a skeletal outline of what had once been alive. There were still pockets of movement down there, still survivors, still infected. Still stories left unfinished. We weren't the last, and this wasn't over. But for the first time since the outbreak began, we were more than just voices on a dead frequency. We were the first signal back. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.